Welcome everybody to our SALLI class, our Senior Advocate Lifelong Learning Institute. We're doing this virtually right now because of the pandemic, so we're happy to see everybody on. We have a huge audience today. I know everyone's excited to hear John speak, and this is our History Bite series. We're also doing another series all about the arts, which we do on Friday, so if you're interested in that, certainly you can find out more information at our website, which is senioradvocate.live. I wanted to say a big shout out to somebody who's watching the video right now, but we can't see her, and that is Mom, Sharon Smith, who's also the Vice President at Senior Advocate. Her birthday was this weekend, so I'm sure everybody would love to say happy birthday. I can't quite figure out how to unmute you guys, but happy belated birthday, Mom. I hope you had a good one. So we are going to get right into this. I wanted to say thank you to our partners. Again, with this series that we're doing, we are partnering with the Mariners Museum, and we are talking to them and trying to get education and try and let people know what they're doing right now. I know they're not open, but they are doing virtual classes. So I wanted to say hello, bring on Howard Hogue. He is with the Mariners Museum, and he's just going to tell us a little bit about what they do.
Hey, thanks so much, Stephanie, and thanks again. It's been awesome to partner with you and to partner with on the SALLI Spring series. So last week, you were so gracious to give me a couple of minutes just to say a word about the museum. And last week I shared with everybody that, that we are designated by Congress as America's National Maritime Museum. And then I explained the process and the purpose behind our new mission statement, which is that we connect people to the world's waters, because through the waters, through our shared maritime heritage, we're connected to one another. And today, I just wanted to share a little bit about conservation. And conservation ends up being one of the really foundational efforts underway at the museum, right? The preserving, the treatment, the cleaning, the repairing of our artifacts so that they're ready to go for our exhibits, for our programs, and to support the research of so many people really across the world. And the little fun fact that I wanted to leave with the group today is the fact that the conservation project around the USS Monitor is the largest conservation project of its type in the world. And it's located right here in Newport News. Over 200 tons of iron recovered from the shipwreck of the USS Monitor is being treated here so that it can ultimately be put out on display, be used for programs, and to support research in the Monitor. And you know, the Monitor shipwreck was found in 235 feet of water. And at that depth, the pressure of the ocean is so great that it just pounds salt into the metal. And if we were to allow that salt, that metal to dry with the salts in it, the salts would crystallize and literally explode the metal. So the whole effort here is to draw those salts out of the iron so that it can ultimately be displayed. And the last thing that I want to share is with respect to our conservation effort is for many of you that have been here, you know that there's a large glass wall that looks into the wet lab where the Monitor objects are being conserved so that you can actually see the process. And we'll often have conservators standing up on the observation deck to explain the science of what's going on here. And we're in the midst right now of a renovation of our dry lab or our clean lab, where a lot of our high-tech science equipment is and where we treat the remainder of the objects in our collection. Everything from oil paintings to ancient Egyptian artifacts to documents and papers and maps and things like that. And this renovation is going to open up an observation area just like we have in the wet lab. And so can't wait to be open again and to welcome everybody that's viewing back to the museum. And so then if I can say one last word about John Corstein before I hand it back to you. I said last week, a great friend, he's been to the museum, and he's back president, or the director emeritus of the USS Monitor Center located here at the museum. And I'm right now working my way through one of John's books for the second time, The History of the Ironclads. He's written a wonderful book called The Monitor Boys, another book on the CSS Virginia, and everything that he's done to advance our knowledge of Vaughn. So thanks again for letting me say a few words, Stephanie.
Thanks so much for joining us, Howard. John, we're going to bring John on now. Hey, sorry about that, everybody. We've got our person back. And I don't know if you had heard me about the books. Where can we get your books?
You can get my books at the Mariners Museum or through Amazon, Barnes & Noble, typical places. I think the story I'm going to tell today is really fabulous. It's probably one of the most powerful stories that has so much violence and yet so much meaning. And that meaning is, all about Nat Turner's Rebellion, also known as the 1831 Southampton slave insurrection. And this is a complex story. It took place 67 miles away from here. West. In fact, if you go to Cortland, you can see a house I've restored where the last killings of slave owners occurred during the rebellion. So I think it's very moving to understand what caused all this to happen. Now, Nat Turner is born a slave in Southampton County, 13 October 1800. His mother tries to kill her child because she says she did not want her child to be brought up a slave. And as a result of that, we will see that his grandmother actually indeed saved him. But they all realized that he was destined for something so special. And so that being so special comes to Nat as time goes by. Now, Nat is originally the slave of a man known as Benjamin Turner. He plays with Benjamin Turner's children. He also will learn how to read and write. Now, I got to tell you all, it's against the law in Virginia for people to teach slaves how to read and write. Yet many people do, but nevertheless, Nat Turner at a young age begins reading the Bible, and it becomes extremely religious. I have to tell you that it will be after the death of Benjamin Turner's son, Samuel Turner, that basically Nat Turner will end up being the slave of Joseph Travis. Actually, he's owned by Putnam Moore, the stepson of Travis. And so as a result of that, we'll see that he will later say in his confession. Now, I don't want you to get confused with the confessions of Nat Turner written by William Styron. Actually, it is one that Nat Turner gave himself. So we get the entire perspective of his story in virtually his own words, because he dictates his confession to a lawyer, Thomas Ruffin Gray, who takes it down and then publishes it. And so that's how historians now have a pretty excellent record of what took place. Now, we think Ruffin probably changed the language a little bit, but we don't think he changed the story at all, because Nat was extremely forthcoming, not only in what he told lawyer Gray, but also he testifies in court that confession is his words completely. So that's a really major document, and it's for historians have a document like that. Well, I got to tell you that Randall has first heavenly visions, right? He says he talks with God, that he sees signs up in the heaven. Those signs, of course, are going to be like dark clouds coming over white clouds. He hears voices as he walks through the woods. He will see figures of people as the leaves turn. As he walks through cornfields, he sees blood drops on the corn stalks. Oh my gosh. He believes that he is speaking with the Lord. He becomes a local minister of sorts. Of course, he's never formally granted as a minister, but he does preach. Basically, we know that he preached several times at what is known as Barnes Methodist Church, which is not too far from Newsome's, Virginia. And there, he actually would preach outside to the slaves, because typically then you take your slaves with you to the church service. So, in essence, Nat is noted for his godliness, so to speak. He also is very noted for, his powers of persuasion. Also, he actually baptizes a white person. That's how much the Spirit of the Lord was with him. And I'm Episcopalian, so I don't know how really to express that some ways. Nevertheless, we have to realize that on May 12, 1828, he has another vision where he says God speaks with him and says that you must stand up and find the freedom of your brethren. Oh my gosh, that means a slave revolt. And let me tell you, slave revolts have never gone very well in the South during the colonial period, nor actually in the beginning of the 19th century. There are several attempted ones. Probably the largest one was Stono Rebellion. Then I guess Gabriel Prosser up in Richmond, but his never, the rebellion never happened. It was ratted out or told about by some slaves who became scared as a result of a thunderstorm that stopped Gabriel's march on Richmond. Nevertheless, so Nat now has this feeling, and that God tells him that he's going to send him a sign. Well, that sign is going to come in basically in February of 1831. I apologize. I should have known with the weather like it is here, the same thing happened as last time. So, or the time before. So I apologize. So, not to belabor anything, let me pick up my story. I was there on Cabin Pond Road, which you go down today in Southampton County. It has some gravel on it, but it's no different than what it was like way back in 1831. So Henry and Hark and Will, they all show up, and each of them bring something. Will brings a shoat or a little pig, and they bring some brandy, sweet potatoes. They light a fire in a reptile-infested swamp. Look, I've been there, and it is you keep thinking you're going to see some type of nasty snake. So anyway, and it filmed there. Very hot. So anyway, the bottom line is that Nat Turner will show up late. This is the evening of August 21, 1831. And Nat will come through the crowd. They all, oh, here you are. And he goes and sits over on a log. And he, as if he is absorbed in his thinking. So his followers all, finish their meal and everything. And then Nat stands up and comes to them all and says, today we will free our brethren. Today we will rise up and smite our enemies with their own weapons. Wow, right out of the Bible. And so Nat and Will Francis, oh my gosh, he stands up and says, my life is worth my liberty, but I find that I am willing to give my life for that others can gain their freedom. They all say, okay. So here it is. They leave the campsite maybe around 10 o'clock. They walk down Cabin Pond Road, then turn on Meadow Road. And as they come up, they will pass, well, actually on Cabin Pond, right where it joins White Meadow Road, is where Nat's wife, Cherry, lived. So they won't stop there, but they go on to where Nat lived himself, and Joseph Travis and his wife and the stepson, Putnam Moore, is in the house, and a young baby. So they think about knocking in the door, said, oh, no, that will surprise everybody. So they go get a ladder, and Henry puts it up against the wall of the house, exterior wall, and they climb in a window, and then they go in. Now, Nat has this little hatchet, and Will is with him with this broad axe, really heavy item. And so Nat hits Joseph Travis, but the hatchet kind of bounces off, and he wakes up, what? And Will then kills him, kills the wife. He goes down, kills Putnam Moore, and then they go out in the yard taking muskets and shotguns, and they start training. Nat could read, so he learned a little bit about military manuals and so forth. Consequently, we will see that after training, they decide to go on their march. Now, this is early in the morning, probably around 4:30, and they get part of the way down White Meadow Road, and all of a sudden they go, oh my gosh, we'd left the child. And Nat Turner says, nits make gnats. So they turn around, go back, and they kill the baby in the cradle. This is one of the harsh things about Nat Turner's rebellion, is that he did not spare women, children, and men. If you were connected with slavery, slave ownership, then you deserve. He passed by several free black and poor white homes, never did a thing. So he will go to Nathaniel Francis's house first, and Will, who's slave of Nathaniel's brother, will bang on the door. Nathaniel will come to the door, open it up, so I got a message for you, and he whacks him with his broad axe. They shoot at, Nathaniel only has one slave, and he runs off, and he gets peppered with buckshot from one of these shotguns. So here they start going just down the road, killing at certain houses like Piety Williams' house, and they get to Catherine Whitehead's house. Now, I got to tell you, Catherine Whitehead is a wealthy member of society. She will actually have large slave ownership. Her son, Richard Whitehead, is the minister, Methodist minister at Barnes Methodist Church. Remember where they actually were not preached outside. So they come up, and there's Richard out in a cotton field with his slaves working, and they come up to him, and they start hitting him with axes and knives, and that he goes, why? And of course he dies. Now, everywhere Nat goes, he recruits. Okay, so remember, the army is 7 people. However, it will grow up to 60 people by noon that day. This is August 22nd, 1831. So at Catherine Whitehead's house, actually, Nat Turner will kill one of Catherine Whitehead's daughters, and that's the only person he kills. He tries to hit her with an axe. It doesn't, the axe is no good. So he actually hits her with a fence rail and pound her until she dies. So, I mean, this is and they just leave the people where they are. So they then hop on Porterhouse Road, and they go by the Porter House. Oh my gosh, it looks like the news of the rebellion is starting to spread. That's why Mr. Porter was not home, because he had been warned. Now, they go all the way down Porterhouse Road to then get on Barrow Road, which enables them to go by several houses. Peter Edwards' house, actually Will Francis's master, Nathaniel Francis, is going to be, he heard something was wrong, and so he's riding around trying to find what's going on. He leaves his wife defenseless. Oh my gosh. What's going to happen is that they will, Nat Turner will, Nat Turner, I got to tell you, he's staying back from the scenes of the killings. He is just watching and brooding, but he's the spiritual leader. The real leader from a military standpoint would have been Hark and Will. So they're the most brutal, and so what happens is that Mrs. Francis, Lavinia Francis, is taken upstairs by one of her slaves, and she is now she's 8 months pregnant, right? And so she's stuffed into what is called a cubby, which is when you have a slab roof, you have these little cupboards down here like that. And so what's going to happen is that she's stuffed in there, she faints, and Nat Turner's followers come upstairs. Where is she? Well, I don't know where she is. And they look in the cubby, poke around. She's passed out, remember? And so they say, where is she? And then they look out the window, and Mrs. Peter Edwards and 2 children are coming up the walkway. And so they think, aha, there she is. So they go downstairs, they kill Mrs. Edwards, 2 children, and then they go off to other houses on Barrow Road. Now, what's going to happen now is that Lavinia wakes up, she goes downstairs, and there is Charlotte and Cherry going through all of her things. And Cherry looks up and says, what are you doing here? I thought you were killed. And Francis says, no. And so Cherry picks up a kitchen knife and runs at her, right, to kill her. So we're going to kill you now. Now, Charlotte intercepts her, right? Now, so Charlotte has this moment of time decision. Do I go ahead and follow the instincts of trying to find our freedom, etc., or do I instead do I try to save my master? Now, so what will happen is that that's what she does. She stops Cherry. Cherry then runs off, and Mrs. Francis is saved. Now, they keep going down Barrow Road. I have to tell you, they will come by the house of Captain John Barrow. Now, John Barrow is a War of 1812 veteran. He is warned that the slaves are in an uprising and that they are headed his way. So he tells his wife, is the daughter of Rebecca Vaughn, Mary Barrow, that, we got to get out of here. And Mary Barrow said, I can't leave like this, I got to go put my makeup on, put on a nicer dress. Oh my gosh. And so he's down there waiting. He said, hurry, hurry. And so she comes downstairs with their baby, and then a slave helps take her into the swamps. Then Nat Turner's followers show up. Now, let me tell you, Captain Barrow has, his pistol, he's got a rifle, he's got a shotgun, and his War of 1812 sword. So he fights off the insurrectionists, and somehow they back him to a window where they reach in and slit his throat. He dies. Now most of the people they killed, they just let lay where they were dead. In this case, they took Barrow's body, they laid it out with a quilt over him and a plug of tobacco on his chest, okay? And Nat Turner will later say, if we had met Captain Barrow at the beginning of our rebellion, we would not have gotten anywhere near there. So what's going to transpire is that Nat Turner will they'll continue on down the path. They'll actually stop at several farms. I mean, the death count reaches 57 by noon, because at the time, basically Nat Turner and his men show up at Rebecca Vaughn's house. Now, Rebecca Vaughn is a very lovely woman. Her husband had died several years before, 20-some years before, and she had raised her children. There are her two boys, Arthur and Richard, will be with at the house. Actually, Arthur and George, excuse me. Arthur is expecting some fox hunters, so when they see the dust, because not this time, Nat Turner has 60 men. They all are wearing clothes of their masters or people they killed, right? They all have red sleeves hanging over them, some that are taken from curtains, some that are actually dipped in blood, so they're all red, and they've been killing and all this sort of stuff. They've been drinking everywhere they went also, by the way, and so they show up, they come down Rebecca Vaughn's lane, they kill Arthur, then they come up to the house, they kill George, right? All this commotion. So Rebecca Vaughn had supposedly been on the porch. She goes back in. Her niece, Anna Eliza Vaughn, supposedly the most beautiful girl in Southampton County, she comes out the door, and they shoot her and throw her into the yard. Rebecca Vaughn then says, "Oh my gosh, will you give me a chance to pray to meet my maker?" And they all say, "Sure." Nat's on his horse. He doesn't say a thing. So she goes upstairs to the top of the stairs, and she's praying, and they decide that she's taking too long. And so Will Francis goes upstairs, and I could take you to the very spot where Rebecca Vaughn will be killed with Will's axe. Oh my gosh. It is horrific. And so what will transpire is that then Nat, says, "Let's go. We're on to Jerusalem." Just think of this. Remember, this is Exodus type of stuff in their minds, or at least in Nat Turner's mind. The county seat then is called Jerusalem. Now it's known as Cortland. But so on to Jerusalem is this, yes. And so they're all on horses. They all got guns. And so they ride out. Now they stop by, every plantation had what's called a still house. So they stopped by the still house, and Nat Turner didn't drink. But his followers, many did. Of course, here you're in an uprising, you're killing people. So I think I would have, had been there, I would have drank. So they sample some of the brandy, and they spit it out saying it's vile stuff. And Nat Turner reminds them, on to Jerusalem. So they go down Barrow Road, and then they'll turn to the road that leads them towards Jerusalem. So what will happen is that they will stop by a plantation, Richard Parker's, the Parker Field. They have Richard Parker is a lawyer. He's married to another one of Rebecca Vaughn's daughters. And so they stand at the gate, and several of them say, "Well, we got some friends up there. We're going to go and recruit them, and then we're going to come back." Instead, what do? They go up there and they start drinking. They pass out. It's, oh my gosh. And Nat Turner is tired of waiting for them. So he will go up and find them all sprawled out. Meanwhile, the militia from Southampton County had mustered near St. Luke's Church. And from there, they had ridden out, and they actually arrive at Parker's Field as Nat Turner is trying to get his men organized. They have a brief battle. Nat Turner's men will be checked. However, instead of trying to cross the regular bridge into Jerusalem, there's actually a second bridge known as Cypress Bridge. So he tries to make his way to Cypress Bridge. His followers, now about 20 people, they find too many militiamen there guarding the bridge. So they turn around and actually they go by the house of George Henry Thomas. He's 13 years old, right? And George Thomas is a famous Union Civil War general, etc. So is that Thomas will actually get his sister and mother together. They get in a carriage, ride them. So they abandon the buggy. They go into the swamp. So that he will actually go to towards what is known as Ridley's Quarter, which is near, because he knows he can recruit more followers there. So this is the slave yard of Ridley. That's why it's called Ridley's Quarter. And they have a confusing night. They do convert some to be fathers. However, there's a ruck in the night. Some of them run away. Nat Turner he tries, he marshals his men, and they go towards a place called Blunt, the home of Simon Blunt. Now, Blunt had already heard all about this rebellion, and so he has gone to his slaves. He has over 20 slaves. He goes to his slaves and says, look, you know, I've treated you well, blah, 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 and you now are faced with a decision. You can stay here and help me protect my home, or you can go and join them. So what they all do, they said, we're staying with you. And so basically Dr. Blunt, his son, and his foreman, or anyway, his farm manager will then, overseer, I think is the proper term to use, well, then they line up a bunch of muskets. The young daughters are all out there loading up the others. So they get, Nat Turner and his men get to the gate. And Nat Turner says, this is no gate will stop us because we march in the name of the Lord. Boom, they knock down the gate. And then there's a long lane leading up the house. The house still stands today. And so when you get up to the house, Hark will be shot at. He is critically wounded, and Nat Turner's followers kind of dissipate. He tries to revive them at Newt, Captain Newt's house out in near Cross Keys, and what will happen there is the militia catch up with them. Nat Turner somehow escapes. So the rebellion is basically over. However, the Virginia militia, let me tell you, people came from Richmond, Petersburg, Norfolk, and in fact, the alarm that the slave insurrection has happened is so huge that everyone is fearing for the worst. And so the mayor of Norfolk actually goes to the commander of the naval yard, who happens to be Lewis Warrington, and he said, well, we'll send some troops. He sends a message to Colonel House at Fort Monroe, I'll send some troops. So they get on a steamer, they go up to Suffolk, and then from there they march towards Southampton County. However, militia were very excessive in their reaction against slaves. Cherry is tied up to a tree and shot at, used for target practice. At where Barrow Road comes in to Meharon Highway is actually on the other side of the road is what's called Blackhead Signpost Road. So they behead a slave they think was part of the uprising and stick it on a post as a warning to all. What happens when you rebel? gosh, the militia, General Richard Epps is in command of them. He actually has to issue orders saying, look, if you indiscriminately kill these people, you will be court-martialed. Because I'm going to tell you that if a slave is tried in a court of law and then executed, the owner will get reimbursed. If they're killed out in the field, there is no reimbursement. So, Richard Epps, a large slave owner himself from Greenville County, will recognize all that. So the excesses. So we believe between 30 and 50, they used to have even higher numbers, but based on tax records and everything, about 30 to 50 people were killed by the militia. Added to that, they will bring to trial almost over 50 people. Of those, 17 are going to be executed because a slave can be tried by a court of OEA terminator, and so they don't have to have a jury, and consequently they will try them. They try to have a fair sense of justice because the governor of Virginia at that time is really trying to show that the Commonwealth is trying to be fair, so to speak. So 17 are executed, 12 are transported. In other words, they're sold into slavery in the Deep South. Now, I got to tell you, Nat Turner hides out along Cabin Pond Road until he will be captured on 30 October 1831. He will be brought to Jerusalem, Cortland, and he will be tried. He gives his confession, as I said, to Thomas Ruffin Gray, and there he will actually, I could take you to where the jail was, where he was tried, where he was hanged. All these sites are still there. I'm building what's called the Nat Turner Trail right now. I have 40 sites that are all associated with the rebellion. So nevertheless, so Nat Turner is hanged, and so everyone sits back. The governor of Virginia, John Floyd, will first consider, we're going to have a General Assembly meeting coming up, and so should we end slavery in Virginia and just sell all our slaves to the Deep South, and so we get our money back? We have gradual emancipation going from West Virginia towards Tidewater, and that this might be the best thing for Virginia. However, Floyd does not push that concept. It is debated in the General Assembly, and actually the thing for emancipation comes within 2 votes of passing. Oh my gosh, instead they pass harsher slave codes, as they're called, slave laws, and as a result of that, we'll see that Nat Turner will be, his legacy is going to be powerful, because of how they stop and consider what to do about slavery. Now, I have to tell you, one of the unusual things about Southampton County is that there are actually 3 other men that are born in Southampton County within 10 miles of Nat Turner and 10 years of Nat Turner, okay? So what does that mean? Well, I have to tell you that one of them is a man known as Dred Scott. Oh my gosh, you all know about Dred Scott. He was born in Southampton County. He's taken out to Alabama, then to St. Louis, Missouri, where his family go west to try and save their fortune. His owner, he will be bought, and his owner is a doctor in the military and takes Dred up to Fort Snelling in Minnesota, and there Dred will be a slave along with his wife and his children. Then the doctor brings him back down to St. Louis. Doctor dies. His wife inherits the slaves, and Dred Scott says, hey, can I buy my freedom? Can you let me go because my master died? I want to be free. Well, she says, oh, no, you're not going to be free. And of course, this goes all the way up to the Supreme Court. And the idea will be, well, the answer is given by Chief Justice Taney from Maryland. And he will actually say, well, look, number one, Nat Dred Scott cannot file a court case because he's not a citizen. Remember in the Constitution, the 3/5 law, that a slave count is 3/5 a person. So if you're not a person, then you can't file a suit. And then he says, furthermore, that means that slavery can be everywhere because you have the right to own what? Property. And slavery is actually chattel property. Oh my gosh. This is I think that decision is one of the big harbingers of the Civil War, without a doubt. We became a nation divided at that moment. Now what's going to happen is, there's another guy. His name is Anthony Gardner. Anthony Gardner his family in February of 1831 will get on the ship Alidor and sail to Monrovia in Liberia, right? In other words, what they did is they manumitted slaves and then paid for their passage overseas. Actually, there was a budget in the Commonwealth of Virginia to help pay for that. So Anthony Gardner goes to Liberia. He will actually, in 1848, he will be the author of the Constitution and Declaration of Independence of Liberia. He then will become president of Liberia. So here's, so you had several choices, right? You could, to get your freedom, you could have a bloody revolt, you could go back to Africa, or you could try to legally gain your freedom. And the only other way you could gain it is by running away. And so there's another slave born on the banks of the Nottoway River known as Fed. Later he's called John Brown, no relationship to the John Brown. Basically, Fed will be sold to the Deep South when he's 10 years old, broke up from his family. This is one of the causes of the dislike of slavery, is the breakup of slave families, treatment. There's is a terrible system. So Fed is sold down to Georgia, where he has a horrible master who switches him every day. Fed tries to run away. Fed gets caught. Finally, his master puts what is called a bell and horn. That's an iron collar with these horns with bells on them. So you can't run away with this device. So the owner's son says, Fed, I want you to go in the smokehouse and get some meat out of there. And Fed says, well, I can't do that. I got this thing on. So guess what? The son unlocks it. Fed does not come back with the ham. Instead, he runs away. He gets away, gets all the way down to Louisiana. He's lost. He's confused. And so he comes across a white man in New Orleans saying, look, I'm a runaway slave from Georgia, but I need something, and you can give me a new name. They call him Benford, and you can sell me as a slave to someone else as long as their plantation is on the river. And so the person says yes, and so Fed becomes Benford, as he's now known, will become a slave, but only for a couple of months. He will make a raft, and he will go up the Mississippi, right, until he gets into he goes all the way up, believe it or not, to Minnesota. He then will go into Canada, where he will attend the Dawn Institute. This is formed by another runaway slave, John Dawn, who basically taught slaves other types of jobs that they could do. So Fed becomes a skilled carpenter, an herbalist. He will then leave the Dawn Institute, and when they pass the Compromise of 1850, they have the Fugitive Slave Law, and that means that he's not safe anywhere. So he heads to Europe, believe it or not. And there in Europe, he will work. And one day, he goes into the British Anti-Slavery Association and tells his story. So he has this book. I don't know how many of y'all watched 12 Years a Slave, which was one of the most accurate portrayals of, the inequities of slavery, the harshness of slavery, etc. And actually goes through 3 different slave owners that are different types: nice, okay, and terrible. So basically, 12 Years a Slave and Feds, a narrative of a slave's life in Georgia, tells everything about the family breakup, tells everything about the harsh cruelties of slavery, the punishments that you could have, and that lust for freedom. He is the runaway. So we just looked at, from Southampton County, these 4 people who all had a great influence on the way Americans became, how could I say, polarized to the extent over the issue of slavery. Now, Nat Turner is one of, it's the largest slave revolt in American history. It's the bloodiest slave revolt in American history. Over 100 people die as a result of the uprising. I'm right now almost finished restoring this Rebecca Vaughn house where the last killings of slave owners occurred during the Insurrection, and I'm putting together the slave. Actually, I have Nat Turner's Sword, believe it or not. That was symbolic, and everyone talks about his sword. There's a photograph that was taken in the 1890s of it, and so it's the real thing, and it is actually very, very amazing. Now, so who has some
Questions. So it looks like we have one from Jerry. Just a comment that I don't know if you can see the chats, but he has been told that the Dred Scott decision was one factor in Lincoln's decision to run for president.
Yes, it was. You have to realize the Republican Party was founded in 1855. It ran, the first presidential election it ran was in 1856. John Fremont, the Pathfinder, right, did not do well. His motto was free men, free soil, vote Fremont. It didn't work. And so abolitionism was on the rise. And actually, if you read, which I have, John Floyd, governor of Virginia's diary for 1831, you're going to see in there how he says the slave revolt is caused because we let African Americans learn to read and write, and also because they are infected by Northern preachers and by abolitionists. 1831 is the birth of, you ready for this? The American Abolitionist Society. So, all sorts of things happen as a result of Nat Turner. I like to call it the first bloodshed of the Civil War because it is 30 years before the war, but it really begins the rise of the abolitionist movement. I got to tell you, within a couple of years of Nat Turner, 1834, Great Britain and slavery in all of its possessions. In other words, we don't want these slave revolts, that slavery is indeed evil, and that we must take steps to do something about it. I hope that answered your question, Jerry.
Yes, and I also had somebody that emailed, and their question was, after this insurrection, what were the consequences for slaves, after this happened? Was there worse treatment by owners worried that this would happen again?
Well, basically, instead of selling the slaves into the deep South, so in other words, all slaves in Virginia would leave, and the slave owners get reimbursed. The big thing is that they passed these slave codes. So the slave codes basically said, can't teach them to read and write, that they have to have a pass when they leave the plantation. You know, there are all these rules they have to follow, that African Americans could not have their own preachers, you know, because that was Nat. And so, yes, however, the treatment of slaves is really based on the personage of the owner. Okay, if you're a nice person, you recognize that those slaves are your engine of working your plantation, and so the better they're treated, the better they will work for you. There's some that are pretty well ambivalent of it all, and then there are the evil people who, really mistreated their slaves at the slightest provocation. In fact, according to Fed or John Brown, you didn't need a provocation. You needed was, I'm the owner and I can do what I want with you. You are my chattel property. So that's one of the harsh realities of the system of slavery. I mean, I have to tell you, it is. I've studied this topic for quite a long while, and it is, it is just horrific. And you would think that all men are created equal, as Thomas Jefferson said, but he had over 120 slaves, and so people didn't recognize them as being humans. Remember 3/5 rule. They they just, I can't say that Jefferson was a cruel master, but I don't think there's any, but he had his slave, I think if you all listened last week, I told you all about the SALLI Hemings story. Well, that's the thing. A slave, no matter what type of master you had, was always in constant fear of sexual exploitation, of being beaten, being separated from their families. It was indeed a very, very harsh world.
All right, last question. What percentage of Virginians owned slaves? Or do you have an idea roughly at that time?
Actually, not. Probably there's 627,000 white Virginians. There's 435,000 African Americans. 96% of them are slaves. Now, basically, about 40% of Virginians had slaves. And when I say 40%, it's really hard to tell, but you look at tax records and everything.
Oh, and it looks like his screen froze up again. So we are going to end the video. Hopefully we can get together with John and he can take us on this tour that he's talking about. Thanks everybody for joining us and being patient with all of our technical difficulties today. We'll try and figure out what we can do to make that better. And if you're interested in finding out anything more about what we have coming up, you can go to our website, senioradvocate.live, Live. And everyone have a wonderful rest of your day. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.